I'm sorry about that. I just seek permission to share the screen at different times because I sent A4 papers and then I have things on PowerPoint. Would that be okay? I did also ask, I'll share now. I also asked if I may show a short clip, but look, it doesn't look as if that's going to be possible. So let me just start speaking. I can share the PowerPoint if people want it later. So I was asked by the organizers to speak on my experience as a conflict and peace researcher and to talk about the relationship between invisible violence, visible violence, and the imprisonment of people. One other possibility was to talk about turning criminal justice into a space for building peace in unequal societies where criminalization of the other is routine. To also talk about the trauma within the community and the imprisoned person. And then lastly, to talk about an emblematic case and to give an idea of what my trajectory was as a peace builder in South Africa and unequal society. So I begin by greeting you and thanking the community organizations and the NGOs and those who have read the work who suggested that I be invited. I thank you and I thank those who are organizing this conference for bringing in other voices. The perspective I'm going to bring is transdisciplinary. And by transdisciplinary, I mean that I do use the academic lens, but I bring in all the knowledge I have, one of being oppressed, two of being a practitioner within a society that is still deeply unequal, and three, insights from 5 cognate disciplines because I try to understand a problem from different angles. So this is the short clip that I wanted to show, to just show that the world and life is transdisciplinary, but it is organized according to disciplines, and between disciplines, many things fall between the cracks. So I would suggest that as peace builders, we use the transdisciplinary approach to try and excavate those things that fall between the cracks, because too many times it is covered over with denial. So we try to do this as gently as we can, to speak to other humans as humans and to look at this problem not as a problem between us, but as a problem, as it were, as if it were projected onto a screen and we are all looking at it. So I invite you in this moment to please be on the same side that I am, as if you are in a theater and we are looking at this problem on a screen. And so I'll start by saying that criminalization is a deeply political act. And I'm grateful to the 2 previous speakers who acknowledged that. So my question is, if the rule of law is about order and control, how do we know who is being ordered and controlled? And the way we can know that is if we look at prison statistics. And nobody is denying that if you look at prison statistics, and I will speak now for South Africa, we find, even in our democracy, that the descendants of colonized, oppressed, and enslaved people are over and disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, and particularly prisons. So this brings us to the discussion here about, are we supposed to talk about alternatives to prisons? Or are we supposed to talk about alternatives to the carceral world within these prisons exist, and where particular people are being kept and warehoused? See, I will quote Oliver Tambo, who was the leader of the ANC in exile. During apartheid, he said, South African apartheid laws turn innumerable innocent people into criminals. So here we already can see that There's morality and there's legality. And existing laws serve the political order of the day. And a controversial person, the wife of Nelson Mandela, who was, as everyone knows, in prison for 27 years, and is a celebrated person. Whereas his wife was always seen as this criminal because she committed acts that were against the law, as did other political activists. But there's a distinction is made between the political, what is a political crime and what is crime by a particular group of people. If we look at the prison statistics, then it's their crimes, right? So she said, and she was imprisoned many times, she was tortured, and she said, I am a product of my people and a product of my enemies. Then Stephen Bantu Biko was killed by the apartheid police, and he was killed for saying things like this: stern-faced ministers stand on pulpits every Sunday to heap loads of blame on Black people in townships for their thieving, their housebreaking, their stabbing, their murdering, their adultery. No one ever attempts to relate all these vices to poverty, unemployment, overcrowding, lack of schooling, and migratory labor. Just to end off with Oliver Tambo in terms of making this distinction, it's not really a distinction. We are basically, as I asked, let's sit on the same side and look at what is on the screen. So here again, during apartheid, he said, to be unemployed is a crime because no African can for long evade arrest if his passbook does not carry a stamp. To be landless can be a crime. Families had worked a little piece of land from which they were now being ejected. To brew African beer, to drink it or to use the proceeds to supplement family income is a crime. To cheat a white man is a crime. To live in the wrong area can be a crime for Africans. South African apartheid laws, as I said before, turn innumerable innocent people into criminals. So what happened at the UN level with what was happening in South Africa from 1948 when apartheid was instituted? At the UN level, apartheid was annually condemned by the General Assembly because it was against the Charter. This was from 1952 to 1990. Every year they were condemned. Then they were regularly condemned by the Security Council after 1960. In 1966, the General Assembly labeled apartheid as a crime against humanity, something which our mediator mentioned earlier about what was said about their prison situation. A crime against humanity. Now, we're talking about alternatives to imprisonment, and I'm suggesting we need to also think about alternatives to carceral thinking and a carceral world. And you'll see where I'm going to later with this. I have 10 minutes left, so I'll move along. So what happened in South Africa? We had our Truth Commission. There was conditional amnesty for architects and oppressors and beneficiaries of the oppressed. These people who were guilty of the crime against humanity. There were alternatives to arrest, effectively, alternatives to prosecution, alternatives to trial, alternatives to sentencing, alternatives to imprisonment, conditional amnesty, and blanket amnesty, effectively. So what were the consequences? And what are the consequences in the present? Loss of political dominance after the democracy in 1994, no mass acknowledgement, no mass apology, no mass reparations, uninterrupted control over the commanding heights of the economy, uninterrupted control over knowledge and knowledge production. So South Africa's Truth Commission celebrated around the world, and it was deemed a restorative justice process, so clearly a huge alternative. It was mandated to deal with gross violations of human rights, not the ungross everyday violations that still happen, but the gross violations to start reconciliation and nation building. Applicants could apply for amnesty for any act, omission, or offense associated with political objective committed between 1960 and 1994. At the micro level, what that effectively means. So if there's pardon and amnesty for those who either committed or benefited from the crime against humanity on the one hand, at the macro level. At the micro level, those who suffered the trans-historical consequences and who act out as a result of those consequences, as Biko, Tambo, and Winnie Mandela showed to us. Those people, on the receiving end, is about de facto criminalization of Blackness today. Crime is defined in criminal law and it is individualized. So now it's not, your victimization is not part of the issue. It's what you do. So if you commit a crime, it's only you. We focus on you alone. We do not look at trans-historical processes on the ground that shape you and turn you into someone who commits counter-violence. No, it is seen as your violence. It is seen as intrapsychic and a personal problem. It is theorized by criminologists, sociologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and other scholars, and it is all your fault. So the disciplinary lens gets used, and even the niche within the disciplinary lens, but the wider trans-historical facts of life that is about the past, the present, and the future. Because in assessing all of this over the many years, I know as a Black person, as a descendant of colonized, oppressed, and enslaved people, I know I am going to die structurally oppressed. So all of this that is theorized as the fault of the individual is implemented by criminal justice officials and other practitioners who work largely within alternatives within the criminal justice system rather than alternatives to the criminal justice system and an alternative to the carceral and control paradigm. So I put a question mark, is this mass incarceration if colonized, oppressed, and enslaved people are disproportionately represented, over and disproportionately represented in prisons at present? Why are individuals being held solely responsible when at the highest level, the UN said that a crime against humanity was committed? Are we suggesting that this humanity just after 1994, after receiving the vote, just became completely whole and therefore must be responsible alone for the deeds that they commit? Instead, what is happening is that we, in doing that, implied within that when people start talking about, oh, we need to talk to parents, we need to deal with peer pressure, we need to see what's going on at schools and in the communities, what's happening underneath that. All of those people are regarded as, they are implied offenders. So therefore we talk about criminogenic communities. These criminogenic communities did not pop up all by themselves. I have 4 minutes left. So what's the consequences then for the descendants of colonized, oppressed, and enslaved people today? mass poverty, asset poverty, hunger, humiliation, mass unemployment, lower life expectancy, high infant mortality, high physical violence, high murder rate. So for me, and for many of us, we know that the past is still present. And denial is the need to be innocent of a troubling recognition. And denial can be seen in the way we do our work, in the way we were trained in a disciplinary manner to only look at what the individual has done and to forget about what shaped that individual, and that whatever shaped that individual, it co-produces this crime. So very quickly, so what's the solution? We must have more equal societies. And if the UN could pronounce on apartheid as a crime against humanity, then I think there must be a way that the UN can pronounce on inequality as a crime against humanity, and that it should be dealt with at the highest level so that all societies can be affected by it and start dealing with this individualization of crime. Wilkinson and Pickett say that if the UK were to be more equal, murder rates could halve. Equality, murder rates could halve. Mental illness could reduce by 2/3. Obesity could halve. Imprisonment could reduce by 80%. Teen births could reduce by 80%. Levels of trust could increase by 85%. 2 minutes left. In our practice as practitioners, we tend to unconsciously turn a blind eye. We need to take the transdisciplinary lens. It's not confined to the academy. What we do, our visceral, tacit, explicit, and vicarious knowledge needs to be produced so that we can be in conversation with those academics and those lawmakers, so that we all can look at this problem together and say, look, what we're doing now is not going to bring the peace that the UN wants. The UN wants for all of us to have peace, dignity in a healthy world. We are not going to get that if we don't talk to each other. So I have 1 minute to spare. Thank you very much.